I grew up in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And what is your name?
Jean Morgan Fox. I was born in 1918, March of 1918.
Oh, wow.
That makes me 100.
My friends, this is not a fireside chat on war. It is a talk on national security.
The Great Depression, a time of poverty and economic disparity, a time of unemployment and low income, a time of extreme hopelessness and desperation that could only be toppled by war. The Great Depression and World War II are topics that have fascinated the world for decades. The events that occurred in them and the debates and reforms that have stemmed from them have captivated audiences of all ages and all backgrounds. These crucial years have impacted our nation in monumental ways, and they have shaped our society into what it is today. The tragedies that occurred in these years took bitter tolls on the American spirit and sparked feelings of hopelessness and uncertainty. But what many fail to consider is the boost in patriotism, hope, and prosperity that came as a direct result of the ensuing war. The transition from the Great Depression to World War II, though wedged between two eras of suffering, became a great triumph for American morale, economic prosperity, and national unity. October 29, 1929, a day that would change the lives of countless Americans forever. On this day, thousands of Americans would lose their entire livelihoods to the most infamous stock market crash in our nation's history. Within weeks, over 2 million Americans would be ejected from their homes and become subject to extreme hunger and poverty. By 1933, the gross domestic product of the U.S. would be cut in half, and over 15 million Americans would lose their jobs. The concept of the American dream was far from a reality, and many Americans lost all hope of ever picking themselves back up again. The overall spirit of the American people was at an all-time low.
Except we had to cut back on things. My mother made my clothes and my sister's clothes, even our coats and hats. And we ate healthy food but inexpensive food. She shopped very carefully. Well, my father had a friend who came and spent the weekend with us. He was a stockbroker from New York. And he went back to New York and they had the stock market crashed and he jumped out of his office window in one of the high-rise buildings. That was the greatest tragedy, personally, of the Great Depression. But no, everybody just sort of got by somehow.
In 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected to office, and by 1933, he had begun implementing the New Deal programs that he had promised Americans during his campaign. Though the programs lifted many families out of poverty and gave young men jobs, there was still a great deal of economic instability, and the New Deal failed to fully resolve the issues that resulted from the Great Depression. America would need something more in order to find hope of being lifted out of the Depression. By 1933, Adolf Hitler had already taken control of Germany and had begun his spirited and blood-filled campaign. Europe kept this new regime under a close eye, but it was the least of America's concerns. In September of 1939, France and Great Britain declared war on Germany, making the impending possibility of war a reality. By May of 1940, Germany had invaded Poland, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. Despite the exploding conflict and threat of the collapse of the Western world, the U.S. remained steadfastly neutral while giving aid to France and Britain. Then, on December 7, 1941, disaster struck. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, destroying nearly 20 U.S. ships and more than 300 airplanes. 2,400 sailors, soldiers, and civilians were killed in the attack and over 1,000 injured. This was an attack that left all Americans united in their outrage and brought together by their grief. The same day, the U.S. declared war on Japan, thrusting the nation into the heart of World War II. $17 million new jobs were created as a direct result of the war, and industrial productivity increased by 96%. Since most able-bodied men were fighting overseas, the need for more workers brought women and African Americans into the workforce in larger quantities than ever seen before. Wages were increased, homes became more modernized, and the overall standard of living increased dramatically.
I worked for the Stage Door Canteen, and I was an air raid warden in Philadelphia. I used to patrol the roof of my apartment house, and we had to have blackout shades and pull them at night so no light would get out. And we saved grease and aluminum foil and all kinds of things they used in the war effort. And we couldn't get nylon hose, and we used to draw a line down the back of our legs like the seams of stockings. And but we all pitched in and worked as a group. You know, everybody was trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
And
Though the involvement in the war brought about economic prosperity and diversity in the workforce, the victories that American citizens won on the home front as a result of the war came with a large price. One of the greatest tragedies that America endured during the war was the loss of countless soldiers in combat and on duty. By the end of the war, almost 417,000 lives would be lost overseas. 417,000 men with families, friends, dreams, and potential. Though the increase in standard of living and opportunity on the home front lifted the spirits of American citizens, it would be outmatched by the grief that resulted from knowing that their husbands, brothers, fathers, and friends would not be coming home.
Well, remember that while I sat in my study in the White House, preparing to talk with the people of the United States, I had before my eyes the picture of all those Americans with whom I was talking. I saw the workmen in the mills, the mines, the factories, the girl behind the counter, the small shopkeeper, the farmer doing his spring plowing, the widows and the old men wondering about their life's savings. I tried to convey to the great mass of American people what the banking crisis meant to them in their daily lives. Tonight, I want to do the same thing with the same people in this new crisis which faces America. We met the issue of 1933 with courage and realism. We face this new crisis, this new threat to the security of our nation, with the same courage and realism.